In 1886, a fellow named William Taliaferro moved from Texas into what was then called Pickens County in the Chickasaw Nation. He had a big ranch and a farm near Oakland, and then in 1900, when the Frisco Railroad built through, they took his land, built a train station there, and that became the town of Madill. The name came from a Judge Madill who was on the board of directors of the St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad, the Frisco Railroad, and so his name became the name of that town. Oakland was the largest town in what was then called Pickens County and was the county seat. However, because the railroad built 2 miles away from Oakland and this new town that sprung up around the railroad station and became Madill, it overgrew and overtook the population of Oakland. Oakland didn't grow the way Madill did because Madill had the railroad and transportation. Railroads were very, very important in the establishment of towns and the growth of towns at that time in our history.
I can remember back when I was just a kid, you know, coming around this square, and I was only like 6 or 7 years old. And we'd always meet our grandparents in the corner over here at that time.
And the town square was the center of life in that town, particularly in county seats, and that was true in Madill. They built the courthouse, the retail district, businesses established themselves in the streets that surrounded that courthouse, creating the town square. And that was really part and parcel of living in a town like Madill, particularly in a county seat.
Lake Texoma is here within about 7 miles of Madill.
Starting in 1940 with the construction of Denison Dam, which created Lake Texoma, and then Lake Murray, those two lakes in close proximity to Madill have increased tourism and have brought other economic benefits to Madill. So Madill has really benefited from the location of not just one major lake, but 2 major lakes.
During the summertime, tremendous amount of traffic. In the summertime, you can't get anyone to believe that the population of this community is like 3,500.
Everybody is really proud of Madill, the way it's growing, and we have wonderful churches, good schools, wonderful hospital.
Like most small communities, revolves around churches and schools. Very much a football community. Football kind of works its way to the top as it does in each community in this area.
They all stick together, they work together, they're good about going to all the ball games and all the benefits they have here.
As the railroads were building lines through and building train stations and towns were springing up around these train stations, one of the first group of people, or the first person to come into that town, was a banker. Local banks were the lifeline of that town. You couldn't build things, you couldn't build buildings, you couldn't build homes without loans from the bank. The prosperity of the town was dependent upon the bank, and the bank was dependent upon the prosperity of the town, the things that that bank was financing.
My great uncle was one of the founders of the Madill National Bank. His name was Robert Lee Davis.
The bank then, when Dad came, there were only 4 employees, counting Dad. And if I remember correctly, it was 1 room.
One of the remodels before 80, I'm not sure which one, they actually cut 12 foot off of the building. I know the upstairs part was the phone company back when the operators pulled a plug and put it in another one, just the old TV movies.
My dad would carry me up to the 2nd floor and to where the telephone office was. And the best I remember, they would put me in their lap and there would be a call come through And here, there were little buttons, and they would do the buttons and then get the message, and then they picked up something else and plugged it in up here. It just fascinated me.
I remember you could call and ask for someone, and they would connect you to them, whether they were at their home or business. They seemed to know where everyone was.
I remember worked there as a teller. They came in from the square and drove straight through to the road behind the bank. Very busy, very busy.
It had a tunnel and entered off the square and exited on Tolliver Street at the back.
This is back in the 40s, and cars was lined up here sometimes 3 deep.
I worked there some, loved it. I got to visit with everybody that came through.
The last remodel of this bank was in '81. Mark Landrum was very active in facilities and franchise building, obviously, and planning. We have done several startup projects, several remodels. I won't say this was necessarily on the list, but it kind of came to the top of the priority list.
The exterior of the old building, it didn't have any insulation, and you could just feel the wind literally in the wintertime just blowing through. And so we really started looking at maybe we'd go in and insulate those exterior walls.
We were very fortunate in this project, worked with Mike Murphy, our architect, Micon Construction on our general contractor. So we had a pretty good system and going into this project.
It really started as an idea to remodel the interior existing bank, bring it up to kind of current technology, current aesthetics. And the outside was considered to be, we would eliminate some of the panels and facility and remodels that had occurred over the years and go back to maybe a brick building and get rid of some of the aggregate panels.
Well, when we got to talking to the different, I guess, mechanical people, electrical people, plumbing people, we found that we might ought to look at just kind of gutting the thing and starting all over.
There was some input from the community. There was interest by people that worked at the bank that had been here for some time, that recalled some of the things in the past, and then other people in the community hearing about it, just kind of resurrecting some thoughts.
Each week at church, a lot of input. I doubt that there were very many days that I did that didn't talk to someone that had memories. And besides being very interesting and talking to friends, we actually use that input.
Historical remodels are actually probably my favorite type of construction to do. They're not done generally as much as new construction is because of the cost and because of the different aspects of it. But this didn't actually start off like this. This started off as a pretty typical remodel.
No, there were no original drawings, but some of the drawings we found over the phases of the construction back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, gave us a little indication of what might be here, but we really didn't know for sure.
And due to the lack of not having drawings and not having historical data on what was here, we actually, Micon actually came in and we actually had to do the demo to see what was here.
They started kind of busting through some walls. I remember receiving the photographs via email, and everybody was amazed that the arch was there. There was some original columns there, and they had just drywalled over it when they did a renovation back in the 70s. So we were quite excited that as a designer, it kind of gives you a base to start building on.
When we uncovered it, gosh, the thing was in pretty good shape, really. It was unbelievably good shape.
The general contractor demoing the non-historic veneers discovered some of the old original historic components of the early 1900s bank buildings that existed here before. The entryway itself is a native Oklahoma shale limestone. It has a lot of fossil features in it. It's very native, and it was quarried here at the time. The columns that you see behind me are Italian granite. They're polished, and they were, of course, shipped in. The top of the structure was damaged, and the exterior veneer in general was in medium to poor condition. So the owners in the planning phase elected to reinstall a updated veneer of brick and cast stone.
When we discovered the entrance, we knew we needed to find some kind of stone, a local stone, because obviously when this was constructed in the early 1900s, obviously it was local stone. We knew we couldn't match it. Actually, we were coming back from lunch one day, Justin Jeffers, Mike Murphy, and myself, and we're driving down the highway, and Mike looks over there and says, there's the stone right there in that building. I had read in the local paper a few weeks before that the city had actually started the process to condemn the building. That's as close as we're going to get, closer than anything we could get by any other process we went through. So I contacted actually the owners of the building and was able to make a deal with them. The demolition crew that was up here working on the inside, because this was early on with the process, they were already up here. They had their equipment here. So we got a pretty good deal on that because they didn't have any travel time moving. So they went over, tore it down, piled the rock up, and we were able to use the stone.
They demoed an eyesore, and we were actually able to incorporate that stone to use on this facility. Some of that stone off that building has been ground down and is sitting on this entryway right now, and it's sitting on the pilasters next to us as accent pieces. So we took a old dilapidated building that wasn't, doing anything but rotting, and we actually took it and incorporated it into the construction of this facility.
We needed the stone, just so happened we could get it. We purchased the property from the individual, so they won that they probably weren't going to get anything out of. So yeah, it was a win-win for a lot of people.
We thought it would be a great idea to landmark the main entryway. It is historically restored. The stonework was veneered in place. We then textured it to historic specs, and it's framed by the brick you see around it. We also installed 2 historically correct columns to either side of the entry to kind of set off the cornerstone of this bank building.
After finding it, and then making it the focus piece and using it to help make the barrel vault coming in, and then seeing how it ended up in the end, I still think it's probably my favorite.
What's unique about this project is you're building what's not on the drawings, because you're in a constant state of change.
When we got to the interior and we started moving in the direction of a little more historical sensitivity, we were trying to look at some of the products and some of the visual effects that would relate a little bit to some of the periods that the bank had gone through. And so we wanted to go with the hardwoods.
We usually use a cherry finish on most of them. We try to stay standard. This took on a little different finish. It's a walnut, and it was very popular back in that period of time, back in the early 1900s. It's not a frou-frou traditional. It still has kind of some very fine lines, very linear, almost arts and crafts look.
It was kind of a challenge to get this much walnut, to get a clean, knot-free walnut that had good character they were looking for. The cherry seems more readily available they've used on the other ones, so this one was a little bit of a challenge to get it all matched up and get that kind of volume of walnut. Walnut has its own specifications, grade specifications, because it generally has a lot more knots in it and defects, so it's a lot more of a challenge to work with it and get enough material that's clean enough to use for the bank here.
The teller line, it kind of dates back to more of the early period, but it's also, the granite materials are something that is currently used, whereas in the past it might have been marble.
We wanted to bring in some granite. Probably back when the bank was originally done, it was probably marble. That was a really popular. Marble's much softer than granite. You see even the wear from the bills going across the deal plate on the marble, not so much on the granite.
I can remember as a small child coming in with my parents to the bank and thinking how impressive it was at that time. The teller stations were a white type Carrara marble base, but then they had wrought iron bars covering the tellers. And my first impression of that is that I remember asking my parents, why are those people in jail?
Put this canopy above the teller line either for some practical purposes, but also to kind of speak to the original design of the teller line. It gives us task lighting. It scales down the space over the teller line. It also speaks to the original tellers, which were cages. The structure went, you weren't open, it went all the way up about 9 or 10 feet, and you were caged in for security and a sense of a bank presence. So this was sort of kind of a nod to that sort of historical significance, but also had practical implications. This building's gone through many renovations. The door to the vault, the original vault, actually the door was where the TV is that we put on the waiting area. And then over one of their remodel phases, that door was relocated to its new location.
It's a vault, and it's called a vault for a reason. It's a massive, massive object with thick walls and steel plate. And when you're framing walls and you're putting up paneling and trimming out wood, and if you need to change a 1/4 inch or you need to move a 1/2 inch, it's easy to do. But when you have a 50,000-pound vault, you're not moving it. So you change your design and go to the vault.
It's a large vault. It's larger than most vaults. It is really handling all the safety deposit boxes. It isn't as used as much for cash today as it was in the past, and that's one of the reasons the size and the way they're constructed.
The old bank had tin ceilings in it. There were some black and white photos, but nothing that were in color, of course, in 1909 that you could really tell what color. When the contractors, they started looking at that, they said, okay, we can kind of do something like that.
We thought we had like 3 focus areas here. We'd have the entry, the teller line, and then we were actually looking at a focus where the waiting was, and the ceiling was almost a secondary thought in that focus. But that was when the original thought was there. As it developed and we went further with the development, it became the primary focus. We were always looking at a beam ceiling to break it into quadrants and kind of speak to what was done in a lot of the early designs of the turn of the century through the 30s.
We started talking about putting a tin ceiling in, and we originally were looking at doing just that, a tin ceiling and painting it. Most of the periods back then, they didn't even really paint it, or if they painted it, it was black. We knew we wanted to keep with a very linear, almost a Art Deco square.
It was really critical that we got it all lined up. Being straight lines that it is, visually it had to line up. It was very critical. So there was a lot of effort with that. And that's all overhead up on scissor lifts and not like working on the ground. So it was quite a challenge to get it all lined up and get it straight.
And the lights, the chandelier effect, and even the lights that are in the offices, the schoolhouse design, are all period pieces trying to reflect some of that period between the 30s and 50s and maybe a little bit before and a little bit after, and address how they would be lighting then and how we can take what was used in that format, but use current technology, current light fixtures, high efficiency, higher light output.
We have used some similar light fixtures in some of their other facilities, but nothing this large. You notice that there's the marble bowl, which was very prevalent back when the period type of banks.
When we uncovered the exterior columns and arched entry, that's when that really brought this into focus, that we really wanted to pursue this. And there was a way of trying to relate to the exterior arch that we could translate that into the inside. And this is sort of like a time capsule of walking from the exterior to the interior. You're going from the original exterior arch to this new arch that we created with a barrel vault. And the vestibule is a little deeper than we might normally make it between the doors, to sort of give time to sort of get that sensation that you're walking from one element to the next element and into the lobby element.
There was a lot of hours put into that trim on getting the arches all lined up and coordinated with all the other trades and all the little bits and pieces. A lot of sanding, a lot of attention to the spacing and details of it.
And then when you turn around and leave here, you know, we'd thought about things like a clock or other features that we might integrate into it, but we decided not to you know, contrive it too much and keep it simple and elegant, and just let the arch and the transparency of the arch kind of hold its own and become the feature that you experience when you walk in and out. I haven't really been in a project exactly like this one, where you're starting one way, and then you discover some opportunity, you change your path and go a different direction.
One nice thing about working for Landmark Bank is they do everything from contemporary to transitional to a traditional bank, but never have we done something trying to bring it back to a period.
To be able to stop it, rethink the project, and even reestablish the budget, it takes a client that is interested in the project, interested in the opportunity, interested in the history. And from a corporate perspective, that's right, sometimes that is challenging to do. But I think on this one, the bank was very interested. You know, the location being on the square and having a lot of historical history to it.
Most banks at some point in the 1960s or 70s or 80s or 90s built new buildings, new modern buildings to show that they were modern banks. And that wasn't the case in Madill. So you still have the original bank building being used as a bank.
In the evening when it's lit up, the square is relatively vacant, and turn the corner and see it. It is a moment of being overwhelmed a little bit.
It's a real state of pride and enjoyment you get pulling up and pulling in front of a facility like this and an entryway like this to help think that you had a small part in taking it back to its former glory.
Mark's input was invaluable in this whole process. He has, you know, he really wants to have something that is long and lasting and something that really makes a statement. We do miss his insight, his vision, and his overall concept of the big picture, I guess. You know, here we are in Madill. I can give you a pretty big picture, a good picture of Madill, but Mark could give you a picture of southern Oklahoma, North Texas, Columbia, Missouri area, southern Missouri area. He could give that all in one big group picture, which I think we'll miss that.
Into work in high heels because I thought tellers wore high heels, and Mary Ann said, well, you can add these clearings. We're talking about a stack of checks like this.
They go to the First National Bank.
Yeah, they gave me a drawer full of money. Mary Ann said, this is how you make a deposit and this is how you pay out the cash.
And you have to balance that drawer at the end of the day.
And I did, to the penny.
It wasn't all work. That's why I think our bank has grown. It's a lot of play, friendship. This bank has friends. They're all people that work there, help each other. And I'm very proud of this bank. Of course I would be. But I am for the progress that it's made. As I said, as I came here after my dad had been here for a while. So as a child, I've seen a lot of change, many changes.
Our teller line is just right straight ahead on a diagonal. Absolutely.